two different calls where it starts off with a bird question and somehow we end up talking about Bigfoot. And that is not what I like to talk about.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. I am Priscilla Crawford, co-coordinator of BioBlitz Oklahoma and a conservation biologist with the Oklahoma Biological Survey. This podcast is an extension of our BioBlitz Oklahoma events. Now we can celebrate Oklahoma's biodiversity with you all year round. In these podcasts, we will chat with our biodiversity experts, answer biodiversity questions, and let you know about biodiversity opportunities that you can join. In this, our third Meet the Expert episode, I chat with Mark Howery, who has been participating in our BioBlitzes from the beginning. We call him a bird expert, but he has a wealth of knowledge that covers plants, insects, birds, and so much more. He leads our popular bird walks during our fall BioBlitz events. Join me as I chat with Mark about being a wildlife diversity biologist for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation and some of the many species he studies throughout the state.
I am Mark Howery, and I am the Senior Wildlife Diversity Biologist for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation in the Wildlife Diversity Program now for 28 years. Some of the relevant things that I'm involved with is I am active with the local Audubon chapter, the current president of it, and I've been active with that chapter for, 35 years. And then I'm also the conservation chair for the Oklahoma Ornithological Society.
Well, hello, Mark, and welcome to BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. Mark, you have been one of our bird experts, I think, since the beginning. Not only do you turn in a bird list for BioBlitz, you usually have an extensive plant list and occasionally some mammals and herps. Like most field biologists who have worked more than just a few years in the field, you've acquired a wide range of natural history knowledge. We really appreciate all of your knowledge, not just your bird knowledge, when you come to BioBlitz. So you said that you are a field biologist at the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. Probably for a lot of our podcast listeners, BioBlitzers, that sounds kind of like a dream job, and they probably want to know what you do on a regular day-to-day basis.
I've received that question dozens of times over the years, and I really don't have a good answer. My answer today is not any better than it was 20 years ago because my job is not that routine. And I guess that's one of the things that I like about my job. I've stayed in it as long as I can, is that I am doing a little bit of everything. There's even a seasonal component. I know that a lot of my counterparts in the traditional game program, they're working with 1, 2, 3, or 4 species. They even have kind of almost like an annual cycle. They have a busy season and a slow season. In my position, I'm working with, any number of species. There are about 800 vertebrates that fall under the heading of wildlife diversity or non-game biology. If there's ever a lull there's 10,000 invertebrates that could be worked on. And obviously, I don't work on 11,000 species. We do focus. For me, focusing is narrowing it down to about 45. I won't say that there's a typical day in my job, but I guess you could say there's a typical week or maybe an average week. It would seem that I would be out in the field a lot. However, I'm not. I am generally out in the field once or twice a week. So I'm not just in the office all of the time. When I'm in the field, it is usually for a 2 or 3 day stint, and it's doing some kind of a survey or monitoring project. And those projects vary with the season. The early spring tends to be amphibian season. So when we do crawfish frog surveys or Oklahoma salamander surveys, we're typically looking at February, March, April for that. I consider myself an ornithologist because that's where I first got into wildlife. So when I'm doing bird work, I do some winter bird surveys. We do a couple of them on our state wildlife management areas. That's generally January, February. I run 4 breeding bird survey routes. Those are always in June. And I help with red-cockaded woodpecker recovery stuff on the McCurtain County Wilderness area. And that's typically in May, June, and again in September, October. So there's kind of a seasonal component there with my birds. And then reptile stuff is typically in the summer. And most of my fish work that I do dabble in fish. I'm not much of an ichthyologist. With birds and mammals, you can typically work on your own or maybe in a team of two. But with fish, you kind of need an all hands on deck approach. Most of it involves seining or electrofishing. So it takes a minimum of 2 people and usually 3 or 4. Plus there's a safety element.
Right.
A big chunk of my time is as a grant administrator. Have a series of pass-through grants that we fund through the State Wildlife Grants Program. And at any one time, we will have 14 to 18 grants. I think right now there's 9 active grants that I'm the point of contact on. So I have to every month to do a monthly coordination report. I have to check in with each person, how things are going. Sometimes I have to write the report. That's one thing I've been doing I have a report that's due this week. I was working on that this morning. I'm either editing reports from other people or I'm writing my own reports. So there's a grant coordination component of my job, and that's probably 20% of my time. I represent my agency and my program on a bunch of different planning groups. For example, in the bird world, there are a series of habitat-based joint ventures, partnerships, primarily with the Fish and Wildlife Service, local governments, other federal agencies, state wildlife agencies, revolving around the conservation of either bird populations or bird habitat. I'm involved in 3 different joint ventures, the Central Hardwoods Joint Venture in the Ozark region, the Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture in the Cross Timbers region of central Oklahoma, and the Lower Mississippi Valley Joint Venture in southeastern Washington Mountains. I represent the agency. The Central Flyway is a great forum for communication of all the states here in the central U.S., all of the bird programs. Then we also do a lot of kind of dry projects like reviewing federal register notices. Anything bird related that comes out on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act or on the Endangered Species Act, we're given the opportunity to provide comments on.
These committees that you're on, it's because you're such an expert
Maybe
that you get to participate in these. The more you learn as a field biologist, the more obligations you have to do administration stuff, the less time you get to spend out in the field.
You're right.
It can be a little disappointing as you progress through your career.
No, you're absolutely right. You have all of these opportunities, and here in Oklahoma, we have relatively small programs, and so we have people covering multiple taxa. This is not a complaint. It kind of sounds like it some days. I wear a lot of hats. Sometimes I'm a herpetologist, and sometimes I'm an ornithologist. And when I look at some of my counterpart states like South Dakota, Kansas, they're in the same boat that I'm in. So they're all covered multiple bases. And then I look at my counterparts in Missouri, where there's 28 of them, or Arizona, where there's 46 of them. And I think, well, there's some specialized positions, and my world is very different than theirs. The longer you've been around, the more expertise you develop. And then when you're in a relatively small state, you have more opportunities. Honestly, I enjoy these groups. It can get overwhelming. There's also just the other random duties. I do some public outreach. Sometimes we'll write articles for our newsletter. I'm also the guy that gets a lot of referrals within my agency. So
you get a lot of those crazy phone calls, don't you?
Yes, I get a lot of crazy phone calls. And one's about kites dive bombing somebody, and then the next one's about turtles, and the next one's about snakes, and the next one's about hummingbirds. I feel like I have answered or attempted to answer a question about just about every animal in this state. I would say that the vast majority of people that I talk to are extremely nice. Most of them are just avid animal people. A lot of them they love their hummingbirds, they love their bluebirds. They're just curious about something they've seen, and I enjoy talking to those people a lot. Though some of them can wear you out because they can just go on and on. I've had multiple conversations that have gone on in excess of 40 minutes because the person calls with one question, and then because they get an answer to that, and they ask about another one, and 2 different calls where it starts off with a bird question, and somehow we end up talking about Bigfoot. And that is not what I like to talk about. I have others where we end up talking about mountain lions. So
Oh, mountain lion questions. Most of the ones I get refer to black panthers, actually, along the river.
I used to get more Black Panther calls, and now it's people are mostly staying to mountain lions, in my experience,
Or Bigfoot.
or Bigfoot. And I haven't had a Bigfoot call, knock on wood, in about 4 years. I do get other callers where I'm basically a grief counselor. They have a snake in their house and they're petrified of snakes, or they have a tarantula and they're petrified of tarantulas, or they have injured bird on a lake, like an injured pelican on a lake. There's really not much you can do. There's not somebody that can just hop in a boat and wrestle a pelican.
Right.
I have to explain to people that snakes have their place. I have to explain to people with injured animals. In some cases, you can take that animal to a wildlife rehabilitator if you're lucky, but there is no DHS for wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
There's not somebody that's going to come and rescue these animals. We just don't have those kind of resources. People have different opinions on wildlife rehabilitation. I'm kind of middle of the road about it. I realize that what they're doing is affecting individuals, they're not really affecting populations. And I don't know how effective their time is, but those people are all doing it as volunteers out of the goodness of their heart.
There's just not enough of them for the number of injured animals. And then some people take priority over things that are more rare and more biologically important, whereas other rehabilitators will take anything that comes to their door. They're spending a lot of energy on some real common species or even some invasive species like house sparrows or
starlings.
Yeah.
That's true. Sometimes they are. But at the same time, a lot of the animals that they release, we don't know what ultimately becomes of these animals. They're providing a second chance to animals, but my gut feeling is about 90% of those animals don't live more than 2 weeks.
A lot of your job is doing surveys at wildlife management areas or for specific species. How do you guys collect data for the work that you do? Do you have dedicated field journals? Do you have some sort of data sheets? Do you just put it on Post-it notes and hope that you don't lose them?
It's a little bit of all of that. In the field, I take a field notebook. One of two things tends to happen to them. Either they go into a file folder to be entered later, or I'll enter them into a database that we have. So we have I consider pretty simple shared database. It's the basic who, what, when, where, and the background, the why. We put a lot of records, at least for the rare stuff, there. But for common species, those typically go in a filing cabinet drawer. Maybe one day I will get around to them. And then in terms of data sheets, it's kind of situational. So for the breeding bird survey, we have a standard data sheet. Swift fox track surveys in the fall, we have a standard data sheet. But for a lot of our surveys, they are somewhat opportunistic or they're done periodically. So for example, fish frog surveys that we do. If the weather conditions look right, two of us will get together and we will run a route to look for crawfish frogs. That's very much just a notes-driven thing. We get a GPS location for each of our stops and record what we hear. And then, yes, I do keep a notepad for just the random information that comes in off a phone call. I get, calls about rat snakes, which I'm not going to keep notes on. I also get neat sightings from people. People call with horned lizard sightings, porcupines, woodchucks, white-faced ibis, wood stork. Keep notes of those, and then I have a file for each species. This time of year, you were there for the whooping cranes that Randy Soto found at Lake Thunderbirds. There is a flyway-wide migration monitoring protocol in place. They have a standard form that the Fish and Wildlife Service developed that we enter whooping crane sightings into.
I think that's a really good example of how widely varied data collection and data repository is right now for field biology. There's a whooping crane database. There's a database for bald eagle nests. There's a database, you keep a separate database for your swift foxes. but it's not the old-timey field journal that people used to keep. I've gotten really interested in the field journals and the historic significance of some of the important naturalists, or even people that you hadn't heard of who just kept notes day to day about things that they observed. So do you keep any personal field journal, or do all these notes just kind of reside in your professional filing cabinet?
I think most of them are in my professional world, because since I've been with the department, I feel like people identify me with the agency, and there's just a very fuzzy boundary between when my professional life ends and my personal life begins. And so
Yep.
I would say most of it falls into the professional side. Now, birding stuff I do with the Audubon Society, that is always on my own. I do keep that separate. Anything related to the Audubon Society or the Oklahoma Ornithological Society is done on my own time and is separate. And I do keep separate field notes for all of the field trips and all the birding trips that I do on my own. Those reside in notebooks here in my house. A few of them, maybe 12 of them, have made it onto eBird.
Oh, well, that's good. What do you mean, 12 books, or
12
just
lists.
12 lists?
No,
Oh.
lists.
Oh, okay.
Lists, not very many lists. I was just talking to Esther Key a couple of weeks ago. She's another active birder. I've known Esther for about more than 25 years. She's much better at using eBird than I am. And her advice was very good. It's start today, and then you can work backwards sometime in the future. I've got 25 years of past lists that one day we'll get into eBird.
Yeah. Well, there's an app now for the eBird, so you can just submit your lists using your phone.
Yeah, well, I do know that, but I don't like to do it that way. I prefer to do it on a computer. I'm just very old school. I don't know what it is about the phone. There are very few things. I mean, I send texts and I love to take pictures with my phone, but the only app I really use on my phone is iNaturalist.
I'm glad to hear that.
I love iNaturalist now. It took me a couple of years to warm up to it.
Well, it's gotten so much better over the past couple years, too. At first, it wasn't so great to use, but now it's amazing.
It is amazing. I love iNaturalist. And I really like eBird. I'm just not in the habit of it. And I have been a bird watcher since I was in 7th grade. I was using paper and my memory for a long, long time before any of this electronic stuff came along. And so I take a notepad with me when I go in the field.
Oh, yeah. Either
I write birds as I see them, or I'll stop every 15 minutes and kind of update the list on what I've seen in the last 10 or 15 minutes. It's good for building up short-term memory. It doesn't help for long-term though.
No, I'm definitely with you. I'm definitely a paper and pencil kind of person when I'm taking notes. I don't like to take notes on my phone. I do find some of the apps handy, like later when you're sitting and kind of transcribing things. Oh, but so you hinted at that you've been a bird watcher since you were in middle school?
I have been interested in animals and especially birds, for as long as I can remember. I mean, it goes back at least to 1st or 2nd grade. And then I got my first pair of binoculars and my first field guide when I was in 7th grade. So I guess that's when it started. But I was watching birds at the backyard bird feeder before that. And I had kind of a unique situation because I grew up in Norman. So I grew up in a college town. There was the OU library. Norman has a good public library. So I was exposed to a lot of animal information at a very early age. Even though I have an OU connection because I went to OU and my dad went to OU, I'm not in Norman because of OU. I'm in Norman because my great-grandparents homesteaded here during the land run.
Oh, wow.
My family has the family farm just southeast of Norman. My entire life, I had the opportunity to go out into the country and see wildlife out on the farm. As a very young kid, I would go out with my dad and my grandpa when they would go quail hunting, watch birds and whatever wildlife we could see on the farm. My grandpa was all about quail. He did all of these things to boost the quail population. My grandpa had 9 to 11 coveys of quail, and he loved rabbits. He loved to eat rabbits, and he also loved to create rabbit habitat. We had all this habitat for rabbits and quail. I got exposure to wildlife being out with them and going out to the farm, both in the summertime when my grandpa would tend his garden and in the fall when they would do quail hunting.
Early on, you got exposed to land management for wildlife.
Yeah. And my grandpa was really good with plants. He learned his plants from an early age. He knew every plant out there. He knew a lot of his birds. My grandpa did. It was normal to me to be surrounded by somebody who knew animals,
Mm-hmm.
who knew plants and knew nature, who was had a country experience. And then because I'm in a college town, it's normal to think of somebody studying ornithology. We had George Sutton. I was a kid. I don't think I ever met George Sutton. We narrowly missed one, and we were kind of around. We were obviously overlapped for 10 years.
So you went to OU for your undergrad?
Yeah, I got my bachelor's degree in zoology at OU.
Then you went to Florida, right?
I went to the University of South Florida in Tampa. The primary reason I went was to work with an ornithologist there named Glenn Wolfenden. Glenn Wolfenden was a colleague of Gary Schnell and Doug Mock, who were here at OU. I'm such a homebody and so Oklahoma-centric that I just wanted to go to graduate school at OU. I didn't really have an interest in going out of state, but both Doug and Gary really pushed me to go out of state, to get exposure to something different. I ended up working on loggerhead shrikes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that they were down in Florida.
Several different races of loggerhead shrikes. What we have up here in Oklahoma is primarily excubatories, which is the Great Plains migratory population. Along the Gulf Coast, there's a non-migratory population. I study them in a very urban setting, just right close to campus. Urban resident shrikes, and they were really kind of fascinating. If I had had my way, I would have studied white-eyed vireos, but I just couldn't pull it together. They work in difficult habitat, and they're difficult to see. There's just a lot of difficulty there. Shrikes are related and kind of similar in some ways. They're just like a bigger, meaner vireo. They're eating bigger bugs and lizards instead of little caterpillars.
Well, and if it was an urban population, that would have made it a lot easier too.
It was a relatively easy study. And then, and there isn't a lot done with shrikes because in most of the country, they occur in very low densities. But down there, my average territory size was 4 acres. So they were in very high density because just the habitat conditions were good. They're resident birds and they're just packed in there. And one of the neat things that I was not aware of until I started, I did not discover this, but I was so clueless about them. I didn't realize that they maintain year-round pair bonds, these coastal birds do. Now, the migratory populations don't. You have a pair that stays together through the breeding season and through the winter, defending the same territory.
So do they stay together year after year too?
Yeah, year after. There's obviously some mate swapping that goes on, and there's death. They're not like swans where they're together for 15 years straight, but yeah, they do maintain these long-term pair bonds that can extend 2 or 3 years.
So you were forced to leave the state to go work in Florida, but then you came back. Did you come back to work at the Department of Wildlife?
So I came back home after I finished my master's degree. I felt for me that going on for a PhD is not what I wanted to do. I saw a lot of unhappiness in the people that were in academia. I thought, I'm just going to try to get a job as a field biologist, either with ODWC or with the Fish and Wildlife Service, or maybe even in the zoo world, because I did work part-time at the Lowry Park Zoo in Tampa. I found that was fascinating. You get all that exposure to birds of all over the world. And I came back to Oklahoma, got a temporary job working with Joe Grabowski on a Black Cat Vireo project. I got lucky. This position came up at ODWC, and it was very rapid. I interviewed on a Friday. They called me on a Tuesday, offered me the job conditional upon passing a drug test. Took the drug test on Wednesday. And then I started the following Monday. I think there's an element of luck to all of it, to everything that we get.
I think a lot of people probably think your job is pretty ideal, being a field biologist with the Department of Wildlife. A fair number of people probably aspire to a similar job. In addition to luck, do you have any other advice for people that are interested in a career similar to yours?
There's an element of skill in being prepared because having a master's degree gave me a leg up on the competition. I encourage people to go on beyond a bachelor's to broaden your perspective, makes you more well-rounded. And I think it's just beneficial in the long run. I also recommend that people do, those temporary jobs. We had that term vagabond biologist, these vagabond seasonal biologists that go from temporary job to temporary job. I kind of feel like that's a rite of passage. A lot of us go through that. And
It also gives you experience with lots of different jobs. So you realize that, oh, maybe I don't want to be a field botanist because this is not fun. Getting a lot of those temporary seasonal jobs kind of exposes you to a wide variety of working conditions.
yes, and I had a temporary job working on an egret project. I had a temporary job working on the black-cap vireo project, another one working with another graduate student, a cedar waxwing project. I think all of those help if you can afford it. I realize not everybody can afford it.
So growing up in Oklahoma and Norman, but then working throughout the state for most of your career, you've probably explored almost the entire state by now. Do you have favorite places or favorite ecoregions that you enjoy more in the state and that you like to visit regularly?
The more places I visit, the more favorite places I have. Tons of awesome places here in the state. And so there is not one. I might be able to narrow it down to about 12, but I really like the Ozarks. I'm fortunate to work for an agency that has two large wildlife management areas in the Ozarks. We have Cookson Hills Wildlife Management Area and Spavinaw Hills Wildlife Management Area for Delaware County. Those are just awesome places, just salamanders and birds and plants. I love both those places. And then I've been very fortunate throughout my career because ODWC has a population of red-cognated woodpeckers on the McCurtain County Wilderness Area. Been fortunate to go down to McCurtain County 1 to 3 times a year, for my entire career. So I really love the McCurtain County Wilderness Area. It is a place that is so different to me and so isolated to me that I would not want to live there. But I love visiting, especially in the spring. March, April, May, and June. It's just an awesome place. And it's nice again, too, in October. It's less nice in July and August. It's hot and muggy, but it's nice. And then out west, I really love the Shinnery Oak communities that we have in Beckham County and Roger Mills County and Ellis County. I love that. And I've been fortunate enough to get to do field work on Pack Saddle Wildlife Management Area, which is 14,000 acres of Shinnery Oak community. I love that shrubland community.
Your feelings about McCurtain County, about enjoying visiting but not wanting to live there. That's how I feel about Western Oklahoma. Like, I find it beautiful, but I find it so far out there and so far away from everything. And maybe a little too open. I would feel like I was too exposed for too long. But I really love visiting those Shinnery Oak, the area of all the black kettle grasslands out there.
I am 100% with you. I realize as much as I love the country, I'm just not used to living there. I've always lived in, I won't say that Norman is not big, but I've always lived in a town like Norman or a small city like Tampa. I've never lived a long period of time in a truly rural setting, and so I'm not used to it. And you're right, it's very open out west, and I would much prefer to be surrounded by trees and hills than flat open prairie. But that doesn't mean I don't love the prairie. I mean, when we do our Swift Fox surveys out in the Panhandle, there's places out there that are beautiful, and I'm seeing them in October, which is not a beautiful season. So there is something I like everywhere. Basically, I guess I could say it boils down to there's just a handful of places to say that I don't like. I don't really like the wheat belt that we have in Western Oklahoma. And ironically, I don't really like Oklahoma City. I always tell people, of all the places in Oklahoma to come visit, Oklahoma City is not the place to go. And I love the cross timbers. I do a breeding bird survey route in Seminole County, and I love that route. It is just so cool, just that interspersion of tall grass prairie remnants, cross timber woodland.
Yeah, the cross timbers is one of my favorite ecoregions. And I do have a soft spot for the Ozarks because it reminds me of where I grew up in southern Indiana. The trees aren't as tall in the Oklahoma Ozarks as our forests in Indiana, but it makes me feel a little bit like when I was a kid. I have multiple places too. I'd have a hard time answering this question.
I love the arbuckles. The arbuckles are really neat. And Ironically, I don't get down to the Wichitas very often, even though I didn't work there. Like early in my career, I feel like I started in Wichita. And I love the Wichita Mountains, especially again, April, May, June, when it's nice and green. That's beautiful down there. It's
Well, they also have maples down there, so you do get some of the fall foliage, which is nice. I enjoy going there in the fall. The Wichita seems like the first gateway to natural areas for most people in Oklahoma. If they're not outdoorsy people, it seems like the first place they go visit is the Wichitas. Or if they move to the state, that's the first place they go to explore outdoors. The Wichita Mountains has a lot of nature converts made there because how amazing the small mountains are. And then you have the bison roaming around and prairie dog towns. A lot of people love the Wichita Mountains.
you're spot on because it's so accessible to people. And it really is the place that people know. In Oklahoma, so many people, they know Wichita Mountains is Western Oklahoma. I guess it's the closest place where you can really immerse yourself in a landscape.
Okay, we've reached our quick question round. So I have some relatively short questions that you can answer really quickly, or you can expound to the extent that you would like to. What has been the most exciting organism that you have seen in the wild?
Oh boy, I get excited by the small stuff. So I like the smaller songbirds. So to me, Swainson's warblers are really exciting. Worm-eating warbler is an exciting bird. Bachman sparrow is an exciting bird. And I love Oklahoma salamanders and Ozark zigzag salamanders, Washington dusky salamanders. I've only seen one three-toed amphiuma, but it was just one of these lucky situations where I was down on the Little River National Wildlife Refuge after a couple of days after a big rainstorm. The ditches were flooded, the water was starting to recede. So we were on a birding trip. Somebody saw the amphiuma in a ditch, and I ran over there. He just saw some animal in the ditch. He thought it was a fish. I went over there and I realized it was amphibian, and I assumed it was a siren. So I immediately go over there and I pick it up, which is what herpetologists do. They can't help themselves. But
No, they can't.
You have to pick it up. And I became a herpetologist. I picked this thing up, and I remember telling people, this is a lesser siren. And he said that it's real similar to an amphiuma, but if it were an amphiuma, it would have bit me by now. And I'm looking at it and realizing that it's an amphiuma, and it doesn't have external gills.
Did it bite you then?
It didn't bite me. No, it didn't bite me at all. So truly docile little amphiuma. And I put it back in the ditch and got some pictures of it. It swam on downstream. So that amphiuma is probably the most memorable one, though there are others.
Okay, number 2, what is on your natural history bucket list? Like a place to go, ecoregion to visit, some place to do research, or a particular species that you would like to observe in the wild?
My bucket place would be to go to Australia and New Zealand. Australia is a huge country, so I'm not really narrowing it down very much. I have an Eastern Australia. I would love to go to Eastern Australia just to experience that. I've never been there. I would love to go. There's a lot of the world. I don't have any interest in going to Europe. Both of my daughters have gone to Europe. They were all about study abroad and going to Europe. I have no interest in visiting Europe, but Australia really excites me, that opportunity. In terms of Oklahoma, I have been in every county in Oklahoma now, but I haven't necessarily studied every organism in every. I would love to do some more work with lesser earless lizards. Being a grant administrator, I have been connected. I've lived vicariously through a bunch of other people's grants that I've never actually done. So I would love to study mountain plovers and handle one year. Anyway, those are some of my bucket lists. There are lots of things I love.
Everybody I've talked to so far, nobody has had like one answer for any of these questions. And I think that speaks to the kind of the curiosity and it just wide interest of the people that we have participate in BioBlitz. So next quick question is related to BioBlitz. So what is your favorite thing about participating in the BioBlitz events?
Oh, let's see. There's a lot of aspects of BioBlitz that I like. I know that when I first started, I was all about the species list. And I think that's one reason that I provide a butterfly list and a plant list, because I learned very early on, I learned within the first 3 BioBlitzes that there is not anything that I'm going to see that somebody else isn't also going to see. And so if I just submit a bird list, 100% of my list is going to be seen by somebody else because you just need a couple of birders.
Oh, that's not true. You add things to our list for sure.
If I add things to the list, it is only because I'm keeping multiple lists. I'm keeping those options going because if I were just doing birds, I wouldn't be adding anything. If I was just doing plants, I probably wouldn't be adding anything. I really enjoy the listing aspect of it, but I realized I learned early on by like the third or fourth BioBlitz that the more important part of this is talking to people and connecting to wildlife. So doing the bird walk, so to me, is actually equally fun as keeping the list, but to me, it has a longer lasting impact. I use this as an excuse. I always tell people that BioBlitz happens when we have a lull in bird activity. Most of our summer birds are gone.
Yeah, that first weekend in October.
Yes, that first weekend of October is not the hot spot for birds. Because I have talked myself into thinking that early October is a lull in bird activity, it forces me to incorporate other things into the walk. It becomes a plant walk and a bird walk. If we get a good insect that I can identify, then the insects get incorporated into it too. So it tends to be a holistic nature walk under the guise of a bird walk.
This year, during our kind of pandemic BioBlitz, was the first time that I was able to participate in one of your bird walks because usually I'm trying to run the whole show and I haven't been able to jump in on a lot of the activities, but I really enjoyed the bird walk. I knew it was going to be fantastic because I've heard so many reviews of everybody saying how much they enjoyed your bird walks and how they aren't really truly bird walks, that they are more of a natural history stroll through wherever you're walking. And I think almost everybody appreciates the fact that it's a wide variety of information. And it's not just about like which birds you see, but you talk a lot about bird behavior. And I was asking lots of questions about migration during our bird walk. Are these chickadees the ones that we always have here? Because you were talking about how the robins kind of switch places, that the ones we have in the winter are not the ones we have during the summer here in central Oklahoma. That started me asking all sorts of migration questions, which you were easily able to answer.
Talk about birds. That's fun. And this year, I enjoyed having a couple of botanists on the trip because there's always the hard plants like the different goldenrods.
Amy knew all the species of goldenrods for you, so that was nice.
Yes. And the asters, because asters and goldenrods, I love both of those groups, but they're both very overwhelming. Thinking about BioBlitzes and bird walks, I did not do bird walks in the first 8 BioBlitzes. And then I think it was Cindy Browning that started the first bird walk. She did one. I thought, well, I guess I could do one so we could split up the group. And so I started doing them maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I love every BioBlitz. There are certain ones that stand out as my favorites. Like the Robbers Cave one in 2009, it was like a perfect BioBlitz because we had awesome weather. It had been a wet summer. Everything was green. Everything was blooming. It was an awesome BioBlitz. This year was actually pretty good too, even though it was virtual. The Camp Simpson one, I really loved that because I loved getting a chance to see the seaside alders, all the neat vegetation. When it came to the bird walk, I did an afternoon bird walk and a morning bird walk. My afternoon bird walk, I had 8 birds, not 8 species, 8 individual birds in an hour.
Oh my gosh.
That was the most challenging bird walk because there was nothing out there. So I had to bring in every organism I could find. There weren't a whole lot of birds. I was milking every bird for everything I could get out of it.
So one last quick question. What's the next thing you want to learn? For example, I learned recently how to do a podcast. And so here we are.
I've been waiting for 3 years for Brenda's book on dragonflies to come out so I can learn dragonfly. I really want to learn my dragonflies now. I wanted to for a long time because I learned butterflies. Dragonflies are kind of like the next step. I've dabbled a lot in bees the last 2 years, all the interest in bumblebees. And bees are a big challenge. Pollinators, I feel like I've been slowly picking up pollinators. I love the pollinator poster that you put together.
Oh, thanks.
I feel like a lot of us are on this pollinator journey. Lots of people are learning about bees and butterflies. And the butterflies are the easy ones. And the bees are tricky. And we've got Zach Dufresne now teaching us about moths and opening our eyes to moths. And
yeah, I'm looking forward to doing a podcast with Zach about moths. And what's even more fascinating about Zach and his knowledge about moths is that that's not his normal job. He's like a radar scientist. The moths are his very extreme hobby. And I would say that he's probably in the top 2 or 3 people in the state who know about moths. And so you don't have to be a professional to be one of our experts.
bees right now, and then it'll be damselflies and dragonflies, and then I'll go to moths. The second thing that popped in my head when you said that was knot tying, because I've never been very good at tying knots.
Yeah, knots would be good. I think instead of knot tying, I learned to juggle. Yeah, I got a little kit, a juggling kit, and I learned to juggle in my early 20s. Well, thanks again for participating. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me on this experimental journey of podcasting for BioBlitz.
Well, I've enjoyed it, obviously, or I would have bugged out of here if I wasn't enjoying it.
And thanks to everyone who listened to our new BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. We have several more Meet the Expert episodes lined up for you in the coming weeks. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen so that you are notified when we upload new episodes. You can also stay up to date on our Facebook page, BioBlitz Oklahoma, and on Twitter at OKBioBlitz, and on our website, biosurvey.ou.edu/BioBlitzOK. Don't worry, all of these will be in the show notes for your reference. We are also working on Ask the Expert episodes. Do you have burning questions about our biodiversity? Curious about some natural history phenomenon you've observed? Send us your questions and we will work on answering them in our future episodes. You can send Facebook messages, tweet at us, or simply email your questions to me at prill@ou.edu. We will also be happy to receive suggestions for future expert interviews and projects to highlight. Well, that wraps up this episode. Thanks again to Mark Howery for joining us on Meet the Experts. His overall knowledge of wildlife is impressive, and I am so thankful that he shares it with us during BioBlitz. This podcast is a project of BioBlitz Oklahoma, an outreach program of the Oklahoma Biological Survey at the University of Oklahoma. We hope that you have time to step outside today and explore Oklahoma's amazing biodiversity. Remember, you can find biodiversity right outside your own door.